Hello, this is the second part of the history of the great science fiction war between Star Trek and Short Circuit 2, which happened back in the late 80s. So sit back and learn some things that you probably didn't know, unless you've seen these facts before in my videos, in which case you did know it. The war between Star Trek and Short Circuit 2 had really been heating up around this time, and it was time for the Star Trek actors to take revenge against Fisher Stevens and his cronies. The Short Circuit 2 staff were weary of having visitors on set, since somebody had recently broken off one of Johnny Five's arms, but they never for a moment suspected it was done by a Star Trek actor. The Short Circuit 2 crew welcomed the Star Trek actors into their studio again, not realizing that they were the carriers of a brutal flu that would prohibit them from working efficiently for days on end. Once infected, the Short Circuit 2 actors were too tired to move and were sweating like mad terrorists from under the sea. Worf actor was possibly heard saying that if they were going to get stricken with the flu, then they could take their enemies down with them. It was around the time of Times Squared being in production that the great science fiction war of 1988 was really heating up. Things had been on a delicate balance between Star Trek and Short Circuit 2, but when the Short Circuit 2 people possibly went to a Red Sox baseball game and held a massive banner with the words Star Trek, Star Stupid up in the air, it really put the war between these science fiction giants into focus. Unfortunately, there's no lasting evidence of this banner, but people who were there either emitted a real mix of clapping and laughing, or they were booing at the large sign. One person who gave a big boo was Rick Berman, who allegedly clenched his fists at the news and rasped, "I'll get them for this, if it's the last thing I ever do."
I can talk to a whole room full of admirals about anything in the galaxy, but I can't talk to you.
It was at the time of recording The Icarus Factor that the science fiction war of 1988 was really starting to heat up. Over at the production of Short Circuit 2, one of the actresses had suffered a broken leg and needed to be replaced as soon as possible. The role of Homeless Lady Number 3 was only a small part, but the producers of Short Circuit 2 saw an opportunity to really stick it to Star Trek. The producers reportedly approached former Star Trek actor Gates McSomething and offered her $600 for only 3 hours work. They even extended the role so that she would have one line of dialogue. That's why those with eagle eyes would notice that one of the homeless characters seems very familiar. But it's also the very scathing comment that she delivers in the film that really hits Star Trek hard.
The guy probably had mental illness.
The line was obviously aimed at Rick Berman, as she was always saying this about him. And when Rick heard that Short Circuit 2 had included a line aimed directly at him, he decided that enough was enough. It was during the filming of Pen Pals that the great science fiction war of 1988 was really starting to heat up. A certain member of the Star Trek production team began a soapy affair with the wife of one of the main actors from Short Circuit 2, not out of attraction, but out of malicious revenge, to add even more turmoil to the continued disarray of Short Circuit 2 on the whole. No one knows who it was, but a letter was delivered to Paramount Studios saying something about, "I'll get you for this, Rick, you scumbag." It was during the production of Q-Who that the science fiction war of 1988 was really starting to heat up. As a measured way of getting revenge on the filmmakers of Short Circuit 2, who had been taking disrespectful shots at Star Trek all summer, the hiring team at Paramount hired the voice actor of Short Circuit's Johnny Five to star as one of the Borg characters. It just so happened that this very Borg character is the one that the Enterprise crew shoot to bits. as an on-screen warning to Short Circuit 2 to be careful and stay away from Star Trek unless they might suffer the same fate. The scene in the finished product has Commander Data shoot a phaser beam out of his phaser at the Borg drone, played by the Johnny Five actor, and the Borg character suffers a demoralizing loss as his head is blown to bits. Now, that wasn't the only Borg drone that was blown to bits in this episode, though. There was one more that was blown to bits even more. During the conclusion of the episode, we see Riker blast a Borg drone with his space gun, and the Borg drone explodes in the largest controlled explosion on modern television. They achieved the explosion by not using a real actor, but by using a dummy that looks like a real actor. A dummy that was filled with explosives on the inside and Borg costume on the outside. It was around the time of the Samaritan's Snare that the science fiction war of 1988 was really starting to heat up. According to sources, Rick Berman had awoken one day to discover the gate of his Hollywood house was blocked by smouldering oil barrels, some empty, some partially filled with the thick slop. The only clue as to their point of origin was a calling card that was stuck to one of the barrels with a picture of Johnny Five sticking his finger up and the Short Circuit 2 director's name signed underneath. Barely able to contain his derangement, Rick Berman swore that he would end this feud no matter the cost and that Star Trek would be victorious. In the war of Star Trek vs. Short Circuit 2, there would only be one winner. It was during the production of Up the Long Ladder that the great science fiction war of 1988 was really starting to heat up. It was believed by some that Fisher Stevens said to Patrick Stewart at some point when they were both at an awards ceremony, "I'll wipe my bum on your French clothes," not even realising that Patrick Stewart wasn't really French. It was his character of Captain Picard that was from France, not the real-life actor of Patrick Stewart, who was possibly hailing from the English Riviera of Essex, or one of those stinky London areas. It was during the filming of Season 2's Manhunt that the great science fiction war of 1988 was really starting to heat up. One of the producers of Short Circuit 2 was allegedly caught trying to bribe Rob Bowman, the director of Manhunt, to make him do a terrible job with his directing, to purposely make the episode look awful and amateurish. Thankfully, though, as a man of honour, Rob Bowman, no relation to 2001: A Space Odyssey's David Bowman, Rob Bowman threw the offer back in Short Circuit 2's face and warned them to back off, or Star Trek would go up to full throttle in their next bout of revenge. There was no sign of the war dying down, but hopefully there would be a winner soon. Lever Burton was famously on a night out in Los Angeles in America with his cousin Tim when they came across the actor Fisher Stevens and the rest of the Short Circuit 2 team drinking heavily to celebrate wrapping on the filming of their movie, Short Circuit 2. Angers flared between the Burtons and the Circuits, and a surly fistfight ensued, leading to black eyes, broken teeth, and Lever's cousin Tim had his curly hair pulled out in a couple of tufty places. As this science fiction war between Short Circuit 2 and Star Trek drew to its dazzling conclusion, Burton hatched a plan that would ensure Star Trek's potential victory. For a lot of the previous year, Star Trek and its science fiction rival Short Circuit 2 had been in a bitter feud commonly known as the Great Science Fiction War of 1988. Following from the recent punch-up at the nightclub involving LeVar Burton and Fisher Stevens and many more, delegates from Short Circuit 2 visited Paramount to make peace with the Star Trek team, But Rick Berman wanted his team to go out on top as winners of the feud, and not to stop at a place of peace and understanding. All the time that the Short Circuit 2 people were talking, Rick Berman was trying to hold his cool, and he could reportedly see that Burton was clenching his fists like a real tough nut. The meeting ended with a shaking of hands, but Rick and Lever had already put together their plan, which would hopefully bury Short Circuit 2 forever and make Star Trek look like the best thing in the world. When the filming had wrapped on the final scenes of Season 2 finale, the actors and crew decided that an exciting night out in Hollywood was needed. They arrived at the famous Hollywood Picture House on the opening night of Short Circuit 2. They didn't know what movie was showing that day, but as soon as they realized that it was Short Circuit 2, Rick Berman and Lever Burton concocted a despicable plan. While they were watching the movie, any empty popcorn packets or drink cups were thrown onto the ground, and when they left at the end, they made sure to also litter the seats with candy, drink and popcorn. Not only did they leave the auditorium in a mess, they also didn't flush the toilets after depositing their big stinky dumps. And as Rick Berman would later tell, he didn't even wash his hands after leaving and touching the door handles. The way Berman and Burton saw it, they had well and truly won the great science fiction war of 1988 between Star Trek and their science fiction rival, Short Circuit 2. So that's it. That's the end of the war, and thankfully we had a clear winner. Good day to you, sir.
Thank you ever so much for watching my very good video. Don't forget to subscribe to the Very Good channel and come back next week for another very good video. A video to watch. Now, it's a good video.